Hey, you made it for the second part. Cool. So this time we talked before about science fiction, and this time we're going to be talking about dystopias. This is a really popular genre, but again, like science fiction, this is a genre that is not something we're going to focus on. We're actually just doing it because some of the books we want to have a look at happen to use it. Okay, so we're not going to do a huge amount of dystopic fiction because, well, we'll get to that later. Why not? But dystopic fiction is the flip side of utopic ideas. So that one side, either utopia and dystopia are one side of the same coin. So if we're going to have a look at this, we actually need to discuss what it is, but also what it isn't. Utopian fiction is a concept of a perfect society. The idea of, well, what would society look like if it was completely and utterly perfect? So if everyone was great, if you've solved all the problems, of course, solving all the problems of the world is like a major task. And this is why utopian fiction is so rare. Is really, really rare. It's very optimistic, but it's really rare because people who are optimistic often get mocked or told they're not being realistic, quite frankly, which is like such a bummer. I mean, talk about being really negative, guys. Like you really get me down when you do that. But dystopian fiction is like the pessimist's view of the world, that everyone is horrible, that we will certainly face complete and utter annihilation or complete collapse. It's characterized by totalitarian or authoritarian governments. It's generally societal collapse, or neglect. Environmental collapse caused by either environmental issues, be like climate change, or by the bomb. The bomb was a big one for this. So like the idea of post-apocalyptic societies and the idea of that bringing out the absolute worst in humanity. So when you look at dystopian fiction is really coming out of two big novels. 1984, with its extremely authoritarian, totalitarian government that controls its people, and Brave New World, where the people are basically anesthetized by technology into stupidity. Both of these, well, Huxley, really a seriously elitist, modernist writer, and so misogynistic. I mean, I talked about some of the problems of modernism as a movement, and really Huxley, yeah, he's both. There's a real skepticism of the masses in dystopian works. These works especially, the idea that if I'm fed and housed and clothed, I don't care what they get up to, which, is like really underestimating the people. I mean, it's basically saying that there are special people who have like an education who can be better and see the finer things. And then there are just the ordinary people who can be thrown anything and it doesn't matter. I mean, seriously, dude, talk about classist, talk about misogynistic, because there are never, you see maybe one woman in these books who has any kind of independent thought, because we're all so stupid. So I'm afraid from the outset, I do find dystopian fiction really distasteful. And this dystopian fiction really picks off after World War II, as everybody lives in fear of the bomb. So the idea that we'd all get blown out of existence, which didn't happen. Because, maybe, just maybe, we're better than people think. We're not great. No one is great. But the fact that we didn't destroy ourselves in the mid-60s, probably, or the mid-century, probably tells us we might be a little bit better than some of these dystopian authors would like to think we are. But anyway, dystopian fiction is generally written to critique the now. So a very, very famous dystopian fiction fiction writer is Margaret Atwood. Margaret Atwood, of course, everybody knows The Handmaid's Tale, which she wrote in the mid-80s after the revolution in Iran and the immediate withdrawal of rights from women. So after that particular positioning, and she imagined an equally fundamentalist Christian state rather than a fundamentalist Islamic state taking over in America after a cataclysmic war, and what that would look like, which is fair enough. However, it's pretty bleak. Pretty bleak. Another book that she did was Auric and Craik, looking at genetic modification and the idea of science creating a perfect creature in order to replace us, and actually replacing us, which was, kind of unsettling. More than a little kind of unsettling, actually. But so it talks to fears and anxieties, does dystopian fiction. But for myself, I'm not a dystopian fiction kind of person. It's really, really popular in young adult works. Young adult fiction is so full of dystopias. And it's like, if you can't be optimistic when you're young, well, what hope do you have, man? I mean, I personally do not understand the popularity of this. But then again, these are interesting times, as the old Chinese curse would have it. May you live in interesting times. So dystopian fiction really talks to our anxieties. And as you look at different dystopian fiction from different periods, you see the anxieties of the period. You see the anxieties of totalitarian, authoritarian governments in things like 1984 or A Brave New World. You see Huxley's unreasonable fear of the masses and the idea that this is going to take over all the things that they think are good. Dude, giving people a decent education will make them more inclined to go to the RSC than not. Just saying. So these are things that people talk about. The idea of post-apocalyptic worlds that come out in the mid-century. This is very much reflecting the anxieties of that world. Today, the anxieties that are coming up a lot in dystopian fiction are around the environment. They're around technology. usurping humanity. They're about AI. And so these are very much like a lot of science fiction. They date to the time and the anxieties that are particular to them. Therefore, we're not going to be having a look at a lot of this stuff. There are the odd piece that will slip in, but it's not a major genre that we're going to be looking at. Now, in and of itself, we're going to look at different writers who use it and play with it, but I'm not a dystopian. I find them too unsettling, too anxiety producing, too much of a downer. They just got bad vibes. It's such bad vibes, man. They're just such a downer. I can't deal with that sort of negativity in my life. And I don't know what happens to you psychologically when you live on an entirely strict diet of dystopian fiction, which a great many young people do because of the vast depth of dystopian fiction in young adult fiction and the popularity of it. It's like, oh man, talk about like not cool, not, I worry about them. That's all. It concerns me. Me, I'm a utopian. Okay? I'm a utopian. So I come to the other side of the coin. I am of the belief that, well, so far we have managed to come together. Utopic fiction allows people to see themselves somewhere that they're not usually seen. Dystopia doesn't necessarily let you do that, because a dystopia where women and people of color and people of different sexual orientation and people of different gender expressions are seen in a negative light, even if it is for the purpose of highlighting how this is bad, really can just reinforce those negative connotations. If you don't see yourself doing something more, then how do you see yourself doing something more? So for that reason, I do find dystopias too negative. I mean, I know they always have some plucky hero who goes and usurps the government, but frankly, that's too much stuff to put on the head of a teenager. It is too much to put on the head of a teenager to tell them you have to, rather than just be your best self, you have to overthrow a despotic totalitarian government. Are you kidding me? I don't have the energy for that. But a utopia, conversely, tells you what you control is you. You don't control anyone else. You control you, and life is best when you give you at your best. And so this is something that I prefer personally. If you like dystopias, great, but it's not my cup of tea. But this is our second video on speculative fiction. Next time I see you, we're going to be actually looking at a sci-fi dystopia. I know I said I don't like them. I don't. But this one's a classic. And there aren't that many classics, genuine classics. So this is why we've had this little rap about these things. I will see you again. Peace and love. Peace and love. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books, writing courses, and other materials to help with your writing.